The blood looked shockingly bright against the pristine ecru wool of the living room rug, a stark, violent red on a canvas of expensive perfection. Emily clutched her lower abdomen, her knuckles turning white as another wave of cramping doubled her over. The silence in the sprawling penthouse was deafening. Just 10 minutes ago, the house had been filled with the frantic energy of her husband, Philip, packing his Toomey carry-on with military precision. It's a merger crisis, he had said, kissing her forehead without actually looking at her. I have to be in Paris by morning, or the deal falls apart. I'll call you when I land. Take it easy. Okay, take it easy. Her phone buzzed on the floor where she dropped it. A text from Philip. Boarding now, hate leaving you, love you. Emily could type back. She couldn't breathe. The sharp, tearing pain inside her wasn't just physical anymore. It was the terrifying realization that something was fundamentally wrong. She crawled toward her phone, her fingers trembling as she bypassed Philip's contact and dialed 911. There was no point in calling him. He was already in the air, flying first class toward a future that was rapidly detaching itself from hers. The ambulance ride was a blur of siren wails and sterile lights. In the emergency room, Emily lay alone on a gurney that smelled of bleach and latex. When the doctor, a kind, middle-aged woman with tired eyes, came in, she didn't need to speak. The ultrasound monitor had been silent, no rhythmic whoosh whoosh of a tiny heart, just static. I am so sorry, Mrs. Sterling, the doctor said softly, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. You've lost the pregnancy. For a long time. Emily just stared at the ceiling tiles. She was 12 weeks along. They hadn't he announced it yet. She was planning to tell Philip when he returned from Paris. A surprise dinner with his favorite vintage wine, finally celebrating the family he claimed he wanted. Claimed was the operative word. Lately, Philip wanted a family the way he wanted a new Porsche, as a symbol of having made it, not because he wanted to drive the car. Is your husband coming? A nurse asked gently, checking her IV drip. He is out of the country, Emily rasped, her throat dry. Busyness. I see. Is there anyone else? No, Emily whispered. Just me. She lay there for hours, the DC procedure leaving her feeling hollowed out, both physically and spiritually. To distract herself from the gnawing emptiness, she reached for her phone. It was 2 a.m. Philip should have landed by now. No texts. She opened Instagram, her thumb hovering over his profile. Nothing new. He was careful. He was always careful. But algorithms are smarter than unfaithful husbands. Her Explore page, attuned to her contacts and location data, suggested a post from a Chloe Faye. Emily froze. Chloe was Philip's new executive assistant, fresh out of college, ambitious, with the kind of wide-eyed adoration for Philip that Emily used to have 10 years ago. The photo had been posted 20 minutes ago. It was tant of Philip. It was a selfie of Chloe, glowing in the golden hour light of a Parisian balcony. The caption read, "Work trips aren't so bad when the view looks like this. Number Paris, number blessed, number city of love." It wasn't the Eiffel Tower in the background that stopped Emily's heart. It was the reflection in the oversized sunglasses perched on Chloe's head. Reflected in the dark lenses was a man in a navy blue suit, leaning over a railing, smoking a cigar. Philip didn't smoke, at least. He told Emily he'd quit 5 years ago. But the clincher wasn't the cigar. It was the distinct flash of a platinum watch on his wrist. A Patek Philippe Emily had bought him for their 5th anniversary. And there was one more detail on the bistro table next to Chloe. Sat a familiar silk scarf. It was vintage Herm Faye's, a kaleidoscope of blues and golds. Emily had been looking for that scarf for weeks. Philip had said, You probably lost it at the dry cleaners. You've been so forgetful lately. He hadn't just cheated, he had stolen from her to decorate his mistress. The grief that had been drowning her 10 minutes ago suddenly evaporated, replaced by a clarity so cold it burned. She zoomed in on the photo one last time. There was no merger. There was no crisis. While she was bleeding out their child on a cold rug in New York, Philip was playing The Bachelor in a 5-star hotel suite in Paris. A sob rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. It tasted bitter, like iron, Mrs. Sterling. The nurse peeked in. "Do you need something for the pain?" Emily set her phone down on the bedside table. The screen went black, extinguishing the image of the husband she thought she knew. She sat up, wincing as her body protested. "No," Emily said. Her voice was unrecognizable, steady, low, and terrifyingly calm. "I don't need painkillers." There is a specific kind of anesthesia that kicks in for women the moment they realize their entire life has been a well-decorated lie. Emily rejecting the painkillers isn't about bravery. It is about calibration. She needs to feel the sharp edge of the betrayal to cut the cord. While Philip is overseas playing executive of the year with his assistant, Emily isn't wallowing in the tragedy of a miscarriage. She is itemizing her rage. A woman in physical pain might cry, but a woman in cold, clarifying agony calls a divorce lawyer at 3 a.m. It's not heartbreak. It's a business restructuring. She needed a lawyer, the best one money could buy. She didn't cry for the baby again that night. Tears were for people who still had hope, and Emily Sterling had just run out of hers. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the hospital room. The woman staring back looked pale and broken, but her eyes were dry. 10 years. She had given him 10 years of her life. She had given up her career in interior design to manage his life, to host his dinner parties, to be the perfect accessory on his arm. She had made herself small so he could feel big never again. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved years ago, back when her friend Sarah had gone through a nasty split. It was 3 a.m. on the East Coast, but she knew this particular attorney didn't sleep. "Robert?" she said when the groggy voice answered. "This is Emily Sterling. I need you to draft a divorce petition. And Robert, I want to file for a restraining order too. Immediate effect." Emily. The lawyer sounded awake now. "What happened? Did he hit you?" "No," Emily said, looking down at her empty hands. "He did something much worse. He made me believe I mattered." Philip Sterling unlocked the front door of the penthouse 3 days later, carrying the distinct, stale scent of recycled airplane air and a massive bouquet of apologetic peonies. He was exhausted. Keeping up a lie was surprisingly more draining than the actual work he pretended to be doing. I am home," he called out, dropping his keys in the crystal bowl by the entrance. He loosened his tie, waiting for the familiar rhythm of her footsteps, the hurried click of her heels coming to greet him, the offer of a scotch, the questions about his trip that he had already rehearsed vague answers for. But the house didn't just gargle back silence. It felt surgically sterile. He frowned, walking into the living room. "Emily," the drapes were drawn. The kitchen island, usually adorned with a fruit bowl or fresh mail, was bare. He checked the master bedroom. The bed was made with military precision. Hotel corners, duvet pulled tight, but the decorative pillows she loved were missing. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of his neck. He walked to the walk-in closet they shared. His side was untouched. Rows of Italian suits and color-coordinated shirts. He looked to the left, to her side. It was empty. Not just messy or rearranged, empty. The velvet hangers hung naked on the rails. The shoe shelves were bare. Even her vanity, usually cluttered with expensive creams and perfumes, was wiped clean. It was as if Emily had never lived there. "What the hell?" he muttered. Pulling out his phone, he dialed her number. "The customer you are calling is unavailable." He tried again, straight to voicemail. Panic began to mutate into irritation. This was dramatic, even for her. Was this about him missing dinner before he left? Had she found a receipt he forgot to throw away? Just then, the doorbell rang. Philip exhaled, relieved. She was probably just at her sister S house, making a point, and had sent a courier with a list of demands. He could handle demands. He could write checks. That was his language. He swung the door open, putting on his best contrite husband face. But it wasn't a courier. It was a short, stocky man in a cheap windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. "Philip Sterling," the man asked, bored. "Yes, who are you? You've been served." The man thrust the envelope into Philip's chest and walked away before Philip could even blink. Confused, Philip ripped the envelope open. A stack of documents slid out into his hands. The top page was unmistakable. Petition for dissolution of marriage divorce. He laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "You are kidding me, Em," he said to the empty room. "Over a business trip." But then another piece of paper fluttered out from behind the legal jargon. It wasn't a legal document. It was a hospital bill. Mount Sinai Medical Center. Patient, Emily Sterling, date of service, Tuesday, the night he left. Procedure, dilation and curettage. Deed, see emergency. Diagnosis, spontaneous abortion, Fay hemorrhage. The world tilted on its axis. The numbers on the bill blurred. Tuesday. While he was ordering champagne in the first-class lounge at JFK, Emily was in surgery. While he was checking into the suite with Chloe, Emily was losing their child. His knees actually gave out. He slumped against the entryway console. The silence of the apartment suddenly roared with accusation. The peonies he had brought home lay on the floor, looking ridiculous and obscene. He scrambled for his phone again, his fingers fumbling. He dialed Sarah, Emily's best friend. "Don't you dare," Sarah's voice answered, dripping with ice. "Don't you dare say a word." "Sarah, I didn't know," Philip stammered, his voice cracking. "I swear to God, I didn't know about the baby. Tell me where she is. I need to fix this." "Fix it," Sarah laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You can't fix a dead baby, Philip, and you can't fix this marriage. You are done. Check your email. Your lawyer has everything." Click. Philip stared at the phone. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the defensive adrenaline of a man who was used to controlling every outcome. She couldn't just vanish. She was his wife. She was fragile. She needed him. This was a misunderstanding he could smooth over if he could just see her. He opened his banking app. They shared an American Express account. If she had left, she had to pay for a hotel. He refreshed the transaction history. Nothing, no flights, no five-star hotels. Wait, a charge from 2 hours. The Sandpiper Motel, Montauk. Philip blinked. The Sandpiper. It was a roadside dump 3 hours away on the tip of Long Island. Why would Emily, a woman who wouldn't sleep on sheets with a thread count under 600, be at a cheap motel? She was spiraling. She was having a breakdown. He had to save her. He grabbed his keys, leaving his suitcase in the hall. He ran to the garage, jumped into his Porsche, and floored it. The drive to Montauk took 2.5 hours of aggressive weaving through traffic. He spent the entire drive rehearsing his speech. He would cry. He would admit he was working too hard. He would never mention Chloe. He would bring her home and hire the best doctors. He would rewrite the narrative. He pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Sandpiper as the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the faded motel sign. His Porsche looked remarkably out of place next to the rusted pickup trucks and sedans. He marched to the front desk. A teenager chewing gum looked up. "Emily Sterling," Philip demanded, slapping a $100 bill on the counter. "What room?" The kid barely glanced at the money. "Room 12, end of the block." Philip strode across the parking lot, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it, the grand gesture, the reconciliation. He reached room 12 and pounded on the peeling paint of the door. "Emily, open the door, it is me." Silence. "Emily, please, I know about the baby. I am so sorry, just let me in." The lock clicked. Philip prepared his face. Concerned, loving, desperate. The door swung open. "Emily, I." The words died in his throat. Standing in the doorway wasn't Emily. It was a tall, silver-haired man in an immaculately tailored charcoal suit that cost more than the motel itself. He held a file in one hand and adjusted his rimless glasses with the other. "Mr. Sterling, simply predictable," the man said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Who are you?" Philip demanded, trying to look past him into the dim room. "Where is my wife?" "My name is Robert Vance," the lawyer said, stepping forward to block Philip's view. "And as of this morning, I represent Mrs. Sterling. And no, she isn't here. She knew you detracked the credit card. It was a decoy." Philip felt the blood drain from his face. A decoy. "She used the card to book this room to ensure you'd come here, specifically so I could give you this personally." Robert handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a temporary restraining order. "You have been geofenced, Mr. Sterling," Robert said with a thin, professional smile. "Come within 500 feet of Emily or attempt to contact her electronically, and you will be arrested. She doesn't want your apology, she wants half." Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer, brutal elegance of a decoy hotel room. Philip thought he was chasing a hysterical wife to a roadside motel to play the hero. Instead, he walked into a legal ambush, spending $300 to book a room you never intend to sleep in just to ensure your lawyer can serve your husband a restraining order in person. That is breathtaking. It is petty, precise, and practical. It sees essentially saying, "Keep the Porsche, darling. I am taking the dignity." Robert stepped back and closed the door gently in Philip's stunned face. Philip stood alone in the gravel parking lot, the ocean wind whipping at his face. For the first time in his life, money, charm, and speed had gotten him absolutely nowhere. He wasn't the hero coming to the rescue. He was the enemy, and he had just walked into a trap set by the woman he thought he owned. 1 year, 365 days since the gravel crunched under Philip's Italian loafers in that Montauk parking lot. The grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel was a sea of black ties and silk gowns, humming with the specific frequency of old money and new ambition. This was the annual Luminary Gala, the night where industry titans came to preen. Philip Sterling stood near the open bar, swirling a tumbler of scotch that he didn't really want. He looked fine. To the casual observer, he was still the golden boy of the financial sector. But those who looked closer saw the tension in his jaw, the slight graying at his temples that hadn't been there a year ago. The divorce had been quiet but surgically precise. Emily hadn't dragged him through the mud publicly. She had simply taken her half and vanished into thin air. Rumors had swirled, of course, whispers that she had moved to Europe or perhaps a sanctuary in Bali. Philip had eventually stopped looking. He told himself it was better this way. She was weak, emotional. He needed someone with grit. Have you heard? A voice murmured nearby. Two socialites were huddled together, their eyes darting toward the curtained stage at the front of the room. The new creative director for Phoenix is being unveiled tonight. They say the pre-sales for the debut collection have already outpaced the heritage brands. Philip rolled his eyes. Phoenix, the jewelry brand, had appeared out of nowhere 6 months ago, dominating social media with designs that were fierce, jagged, and unapologetically bold. It was the it brand of the year, but the designer had remained anonymous, known only as E. Probably some 20-year-old from design school, Philip muttered to his colleague, checking his watch. I give it 6 months before they fold. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The murmur of the crowd died down instantly. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Tonight, we celebrate resilience. We celebrate rebirth. Please welcome the visionary behind Phoenix, Miss Emily Sterling. Philip froze. The glass halfway to his mouth stopped. Number, it couldn't be. The velvet curtains parted. The woman who walked out was not the Emily he remembered. The Emily he knew wore pastels and soft cashmeres. She kept her hair long and loose to hide her face. She walked with a hesitant shuffle, always checking to see if she was in someone else's way. This woman was a force of nature. She wore a gown of liquid midnight blue that clung to every curve, backless and daring, revealing skin that glowed with health. Her hair was chopped into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed her face like a helmet of war. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They swept across the crowd, cool, assessing, predatory. She didn't look like she was looking for approval. She looked like she owned the building. Thank you, she spoke into the microphone. Her voice was an octave lower, stripped of the nervous fluctuate he was used to. Phoenix was born from fire. It is for the women who have burned and chosen to rise from the ashes rather than sweep them up. Thunderous applause erupted. Philip felt like he had been punched in the gut all this time. He thought she was crying in a corner somewhere, pining for him. Instead, she had taken the pain he inflicted and turned it into an empire. And God, she looked magnificent. A primal, possessive urge clawed up his throat. That was his wife, that brilliance, that beauty, it belonged to him. He was the one who found her first. He was the one who molded her. Surely, this new success was just a way to get his attention. A sophisticated cry for help. He abandoned his drink on a passing waiter's tray and began to cut through the crowd. He needed to get to her before the vultures descended. He needed to remind her who made her. By the time he reached the edge of the stage, Emily had descended the stairs and was surrounded by admirers. She was laughing, a genuine, throaty sound he hadn't heard in years, as a famous fashion editor complimented her necklace. Emily, Philip said, his voice rough. She didn't turn immediately. She finished her sentence, smiled at the editor, and then, slowly, pivoted on her heel. When her eyes landed on him, there was no spark of fear, no love, no hate, just boredom. It was the look one gives a mild inconvenience, like rain on a picnic day. Philip? She nodded, acknowledging him like he was a distant acquaintance. Enjoying the champagne? You look incredible, he said, stepping into her personal space, using his height to try and intimidate her. A trick that always used to work. He lowered his voice to a seductive rumble. You've made your point, Em. The haircut, the dress, the little business venture. It is impressive, really. You've shown me what I missed, but let's not pretend this isn't a performance for an audience of one. He reached out, his fingers grazing her bare arm. The touch was familiar, possessive, a brand of ownership he had stamped on her for a decade. "Let's get out of here," he murmured, leaning closer so his breath tickled her ear. "My driver is outside. We can go to my place. Well, our place. We have a lot of catching up to do." Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face, her expression one of mild curiosity, as if observing a rare, unpleasant insect. "You think I did this for you?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying effortlessly over the din of the party. "Come on, Em, we were a team. I was the shark. You were the soft place to land. It worked. I know you are hurting, but we can fix this. I can help you scale this little brand of yours. You need someone with real business acumen to manage the finances before you get in over your head." The corner of Emily's mouth quirked up. It wasn't a smile, it was a loaded gun. She gently, but firmly removed his hand from her arm, holding it by the wrist for a second, 2 fingers pinching his cuff, before dropping it like a used napkin. "It is interesting you mention finances, Philip," she said, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that only the surrounding circle could hear. "Because my analysts tell me that Sterling Capital has had a rough quarter, 3 failed mergers, and a liquidity crisis looming." Philip stiffened. That information was confidential. "How do you? You've been frantically emailing a venture capital firm called the Vesta Group for a bailout injection for the last 3 weeks," Emily continued, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Begging for a meeting, offering controlling shares just to keep your lights on." Philip felt a cold sweat break out on his back. "Vesta is a potential strategic partner. That is standard industry talk. How do you know about Vesta?" Emily took a step closer, reducing him to nothing more than a footnote in her story. "Who do you think Vesta is named after, Philip?" "Vesta, the Roman goddess of the hearth and home." She tilted her head. "The home you destroyed." Philip stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face so fast, he felt dizzy. "You," he choked out. "I am Vesta Group," Emily said softly. "I bought your debt, Philip. All of it. I own your building. I own your loans. And as of this morning's board meeting, which I attended via proxy, I am the majority shareholder of Sterling Capital." This is the moment the genre of the story shifts from tragedy to predatory capitalism. And I am here for it. Philip thought he was flirting with his ex-wife at a gala. He didn't realize he was being acquired in a hostile takeover. Discovering that the Vesta Group holding your debt is actually the woman you cheated on. Delicious, naming the holding company after the goddess of the hearth you destroyed. Poetic, Emily didn't just divorce him. She became his landlord, his creditor, and his boss. She didn't slash his tires. She repossessed the road. The text message he had ignored earlier, the urgent voicemail from his CFO, the puzzle pieces slammed together in a horrifying picture. "You can't do that," he whispered, his voice trembling. That is my company." "Not anymore," she said pleasantly. "You told me once that business is war and casualties are inevitable. I finally listened to you." She signaled a waiter, took a glass of champagne, and held it up in a mock toast. "I've reviewed your proposal for the bailout, by the way," she added, taking a sip. "I am rejecting it. We're restructuring, and the first step is removing the current CEO for gross incompetence. And what was the phrase you used on the phone to your mistress?" "Loss of focus." Philip stood paralyzed. The ballroom spun around him. He hadn't just lost his wife. He hadn't just lost his reputation. He was standing in a tuxedo he effectively no longer owned, drinking liquor paid for by the woman he had discarded, realizing she hadn't just signed divorce papers. She had signed his death warrant. "Oh, and Philip," Emily said, turning her back on him to greet a flashing camera. Chloe called me looking for a job last week. I hired her. She makes excellent coffee. She walked away into the flashing lights, leaving him standing alone in the dark, hollow center of a room that no longer had a place for him. 2 years later, the hills of Tuscany were turning a deep burned gold as autumn set in. Emily sat on the stone terrace of a restored farmhouse, a sketchbook resting on her knees. The air smelled of rosemary and drying earth. Far below, the vineyard stretched out like a patchwork quilt, silent and ancient. There were no boardrooms here, no flashing cameras, no suffocating sense of sterile air conditioning and ambitious cologne. Her phone buzzes on the wooden table, a notification from the Wall Street Journal: Sterling Capital dissolved. Assets liquidated and rebranded under Vesta Group Holdings. Emily glanced at the screen. Once, seeing Philip's legacy crumble would have given her a jolt of adrenaline, a vicious spike of satisfaction. Now she felt nothing. It was just business. A transaction completed, she swiped the notification away and picked up her charcoal pencil. Thinking about the empire again, a warm voice drifted from the open French doors behind her. Lucas stepped out, wiping flour from his hands onto a linen apron. He wasn't a CEO. He was a landscape architect who specialized in restoring gardens. A man with calloused hands, laugh lines around his eyes, and a patience that Emily was still learning to trust. He didn't care about Phoenix stock price. He cared about whether the olive trees were getting enough sun. Not at all, Emily smiled, turning her face up to the sun. Just clearing out the junk mail. Lucas set down a wooden tray with 2 espressos and a plate of freshly sliced figs. He sat on the bench beside her, leaning in to look at her sketch. It wasn't tea jewelry this time. It was a layout for a children's playground she was funding for a local orphanage. "You have ink on your cheek," he teased, brushing his thumb gently across her skin. Emily leaned into his touch. It was different from Philip's. Philip's touch had been a claim. Lucas's touch was an invitation. "I have a meeting with the Milan team tomorrow," she murmured, closing the sketchbook. "But I am thinking of canceling it." Oh, Lucas raised an eyebrow. The Emily Sterling canceling a strategy meeting? "I am not Emily Sterling anymore," she corrected him softly. She had legally changed her name back to her maiden name, Clark, 6 months ago. But more than that, she had shed the skin of the woman who needed to prove herself to a room full of men. "And yes, I realize the team knows what they're doing. I hired them to lead. I don't need to be the captain of every ship." She stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out over the valley. For a long time, she thought, happiness was winning. She thought it was proving Philip wrong, proving she was smarter, richer, stronger. And she had done all that. She had crushed him. But the victory had tasted like ash after a while. The real victory wasn't destroying him. It was realizing she no longer thought about him at all. She walked down the stone steps into the garden. In the corner, beneath the shade of a cypress tree, grew a bed of small white peonies. She had planted them herself when she first bought the villa, a tribute to the child she lost and the innocence she left behind in New York. She knelt and touched a soft petal. The grief was still there, a quiet, dull ache that would probably never fully leave, but it no longer consumed her. It was just a part of her landscape now, like the old stone walls or the distant hills. And Lucas called out from the terrace, "The pasta water is boiling, coming in." Emily stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean, unrecyclable air. She looked back at the phone on the table, the portal to her old life, to the wars she fought and won. Then she looked at the open door, where the warm yellow light of the kitchen spilled out, and the sound of jazz music was playing softly. "Coming," she called back. She left the phone on the table, turned her back on the view, and walked into the warmth of the house. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had flown away to build a nest where the fire couldn't touch her anymore. Let us pour a glass of something dry and discuss the accessory wife phenomenon. Philip, like so many men with more ambition than character, viewed Emily not as a partner, but as a fixture. She was the sconce on the wall of his life, decorative, dimmable, and easily replaced if she flickered. He mistook her silence for submission and her support for a lack of spine. He failed to realize that the soft woman managing his life was also the one reading the fine print. The beauty of Emily's revenge isn't that she became cruel. It's that she became indifferent. She used the very skills she honed supporting him: organization, strategy, foresight, to dismantle him. It's a stark reminder: never underestimate the woman who knows exactly where you hide your bodies, because she says the one who was forced to clean up the mess. So I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by a partner who thought you were just the help? Did you ever have to turn your softness into armor? And most importantly, if you could acquire your ex's debt for pennies on the dollar, would you do it, or would you just let him depreciate on his own? Tell me your merger and acquisition stories. The comments are open. Madam, read out.